Good afternoon. It's good to see all of you, and this is again Dharmet time. And the title of this Dharmet is Reaching In and Reaching Out. And so we're going to be looking at the relationship between coming into our internal world, balanced with going out into our external world, and how being in our external world is also balanced by our internal world. So it's sort of a figure eight. They influence each other. And I want to return to the pink flyer, because mine's pink, that I read on Thursday night, just 2 days ago, right? 2 evenings ago. And the second paragraph read, "The world is on fire. As contemplatives, we can look into the heart of darkness with the Dharma perspective rather than the habitual veils of our reactivity, our views, and our opinions." So really, it could also read, our inner world is on fire, because the outer world can't be on fire unless there's enough inner worlds that are on fire to be setting the fires in the outer world. Right. And when we look into the heart of darkness, it's not all about looking into the heart of darkness out there. It's, can we really have the courage, which everybody here does, or you wouldn't be here, to look into the heart of darkness within us, into where the seeds and roots and maybe vines of greed or ill will or delusion are in us. And to do our inner work to be able to uproot those. Eventually, the uprooting of all of those is part of what leads to complete awakening. So we're weeding the garden inside, one pull at a time. And so this topic, it is framed in this particular way, became really of interest to me several years ago when I was offering a group for experienced practitioners, which I had done every year. I've done it for 6 years now. And we always take a book and we study it. And we studied Thanissaro and Kittisaro's book, Time to Stand Up. I just went blank on whatever the title is. But it's really very much about being in the world. And both of Thanissaro and Kittisaro, if you don't know them, they were monastics, a bhikkhuni and a bhikkhu. And in the Theravadan tradition, and kind of fell in love and disrobed and got married and continued to teach. And they have a center in South Africa. So I had a lot of respect for them and the work that they're doing. And so I was trying to frame it for myself, like, what is the relationship between the inner work and being in the world in a way that is consistent and congruent with what we value, right? And there is keep myself focused here. And the Buddha has offered us a very integrated path of practice. And one quote from the Dhammapada that points to this is the to avoid all evil, to cultivate the good, and to cleanse one's mind. This is the teaching of the Buddhas. This is from the Dhammapada. And this is one translation, and there's a lot going on nowadays about, did the Buddha really say this or that? So I went back to this particular translation, but it's not the one that touches my heart. And the one that I have relied on over the years when I think, what am I doing? Or sort of getting mired in all the practices and the teachings and just needing some clarity. And the one that really touches me is do no harm, act for the good, purify the mind. This is the teaching of the awakened ones. So do no harm, act for the good, purify the mind. This is the teaching of the awakened. And we looked at the first two, do no harm and act for the good, on Thursday night when we talked about the precepts, right? And when I said there are things that we refrain from doing in these 5 mindfulness trainings, and there's things that there's practice we want to engage in. And so I named them, that the actions that we want to refrain from practicing is killing or harming ourselves or others. The second is stealing, taking what is not freely offered. The third is harming ourselves or others with our sexual activity, action, or speech, or even energy. The fourth was to refrain from harsh, false, idle, or divisive speech. And the sixth was using any intoxicants that lead to heedlessness and cloud the mind. So those are the do no harm. Don't do that stuff. And we all agreed not to do that stuff while we were here to the best of our ability, moment to moment. But also, it's all about doing the good, acting for the good. So the correlate for the first mindfulness training would be to protect all life. Even the little bitty ones when we can. To respect others' property. To recognize that that doesn't belong to me, it belongs to someone else, and to respect it. To respect the hearts and bodies of our others and ourselves. The fourth, to speak what is true with respect and kindness. And of course on Thursday we were really taking that vow or that commitment to do that with ourselves. We've had some conversations in small group and such, but really, can we speak to ourselves with kindness and wisdom and respect? And then the fifth is the actions that we're engaging is to practice mindfulness to see clearly so that we can keep our commitments. So this is one embodiment of the do no harm, act for the good that I wanted to bring in as part of what you are doing here. What we all actually circled around and in a very close-in kind of way, thumbs held to commit to these vows that we took, as well as committing to holding sacred what we see and hear here together. And we also committed to not disappearing, to not just leaving without letting someone know. Knowing how deeply our lives intertwine, what we do matters. What we don't do, what we refrain from doing, matters. So that's the first two, the do no harm, act for the good. But actually, there isn't any way for that to happen if we're working from and thinking from unwholesome mind states. Because it doesn't just, behavior and words don't appear out of nowhere. They appear out of our minds. Right? So the part about purifying the mind, this is another rather famous part of or well-named part of the Dhammapada. All experience is preceded by mind, led by mind, made by mind. Speak or act with a corrupted mind, interesting word, corrupted mind, and suffering follows, as the wagon wheel follows the hoof of the ox. All experience is preceded by mind. And experience here is really the actions and the words that we take, that what we're bringing out into the world. All experience is preceded by mind, led by mind, made by mind. Speak or act with a peaceful mind, and happiness follows, like a never-departing shadow. This is a translation by Gil Fronsdale. And the contrast between a corrupted mind and a peaceful mind, because corrupted has all these kind of connotations to it, like words do. I mean, a word we hear a word and we all have different associations with it. Corrupted sounds like it's really something that has had something happen in it that's been upended, corrupted, maybe even we could say tainted. And we all have corruption in our mind, right? And we also have the seeds for peace in our mind. But peacefulness is something that is what we are challenged to cultivate. Peacefulness, tranquility, love, compassion. Really could think of all of the paramis, the Brahma Viharas, that we're working to cultivate wholesome mind states. And we're working to uproot unwholesome mind states. So that's the purifying the mind. Now, we might say, well, so how do we do this? Right? Well, we all know, we know a lot. You've heard a lot. Even if this was your very first retreat, you've had a few clue-ins to how we work with difficult mind states. And the Buddha said, if it were not possible to free the heart from entanglement in unhealthy states, I would not teach you to do so, if it was not possible. But just because it is possible to free the heart from entanglement in unhealthy states, do I offer these teachings? And reminiscent of a previous administration, there was the term that was said often, which is, yes, we can. And so that's what I wrote down next to it. Yes, we can do this. Yes, we can. And we are doing it. Each person in this room is doing that by taking time out from the world that's on fire, and it's also beautiful and glorious and has just amazing opportunities in it and people in it, to be here. And so, I mean, I'm really not kidding when I say that I've had, a deep respect for every one of us in this circle. There's a lot of other places you could be. And there may have been moments during this retreat where you've said, I wish I were somewhere else. This is really hard. This isn't what I expected. This isn't what I wanted. And yet here you are. This learning to stay, learning to stay, learning to stay with what's difficult. And so what we are doing here is fundamentally these amazing practices of mindful awareness, of mindfulness, in these 4 pastures or domains or foundations or establishments of the Satipatthana Sutta. And of course, we started with mindfulness of body, because that's the first one. It's like that's the ground. Just like when we do Qigong practice, we start with grounding into this physicality, this amazing physicality that is replete with, there's moments when words don't come to me, and so I pause, and sometimes words come that aren't even the right one. I paused with, I'm not sure replete was the right word, but filled. Let's say filled with pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral Vedana, right? And we've all had waves of that throughout these days, of strong unpleasant sensations, strong pleasant sensations, and then those that are neither pleasant nor unpleasant that we often don't even notice. And we've become more mindful of the Vedana, the co-arising of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. We've been invited to be mindful of that, and mindful of mind states and emotions. Big category. And also mindful of the Dhammas. The truths. For instance, the Dharmet this morning on the 3 characteristics, and other references to the 4 Noble Truths. So with clear comprehension, bare attention and clear comprehension, we can know these domains of our inner world. And also in the Satipatthana Sutta, there is the instruction to be mindful internally and mindful externally, right? That's part of the refrain, internally and externally. So we're also noticing these domains in others, in the world. And that's another part of this, the flow between the internal mindfulness and external mindfulness. And we've focused on how to work with strong experience in the realm of mind and heart, emotions and thoughts, by coming back into the body, right? That's been the instruction, the direction, the invitation. Come back in and feel the somatic expression of those thoughts, of those feelings, and the patterns, feeling the patterns of them, and coming right in to what's alive right here and now. And then being able to offer care, presence, space, openness, invitation to the difficulties, rather than turning away, rather than trying to control, rather than rejecting, the invitation to open to, with the energy of may this too serve to awaken our heart and mind. But the mindfulness of body is the scaffolding to be able to be with these strong experiences that come. We also have had metta practice, loving kindness practice, loving presence, and seeing the good in ourselves and others, and sending goodwill, sort of as the antidote to ill will. We had our training, and our ongoing training in Sila, and the generosity that is to maintain and to honor the five mindfulness trainings with each other. It's a generous gesture, as is the generosity that if you have a yogi job, if there's something that you're doing to support the community, that's an act of generosity. That you've been practicing patience and persistence. And these are all naming different paramis, these great perfections that we're cultivating also. And cultivating compassion to actually be with our own suffering. And sometimes to witness it as we've listened to someone share in small group. To actually sit in the fire with someone as we sit in the fire with ourselves without burning up. Without burning up. So it's this sense of coming in, doing our internal work. And also what you were invited to do is kind of to do the U-turn away from what is the stimulus of the pain and come into the pain that's here now. Because it's the here and now where it's going to be, the buttons are going to get deactivated that we have. Right? I think I mentioned that about we can't get everybody to quit pushing our buttons, our vulnerabilities, our wounding, but we sure as heck can work to metabolize them so we're less affected when someone says or does something. We don't take it as personally, potentially. We realize that's actually not true. Whatever you're thinking and what you're saying, and the way that you're treating is actually not true, and it's not acceptable. But as we deactivate the buttons, then we can go into the world with a wisdom and a compassion, relate to the world with a wisdom and compassion that doesn't throw fire, or gasoline on whatever is already burning. And when we do, then we make amends. It's like progress, not perfection in all of this. And we have different spheres of influence. So we ripple out in these spheres. For some, we definitely have the sphere of influence within our own mind. And we're responsible for this. Nobody else is responsible for the transformation and the illumination of our own mind and heart. It's our job. We have the tools, and then it's our job. But it's also the sphere of influence as we ripple out. It might be close within our family, within our relationships, within our neighborhood. Or it might be with people that we work with, the people that we encounter regularly and have relationships with. It might be you might engage in a little bit of a broader sphere of influence, maybe in your community, volunteer work, something that you're doing that matters. I know there's people in this room that volunteer for IMCC, actually. So there's things that matter to you. There's causes that you want to support, whether it's with your energy, sometimes with your support financially. But there's also the community of, as you're walking down the street, how do you respond when you see people? Do you stop? Do you smile? Do you hold the door open when you can? Or are we kind of in that hurry zone? So we have influence in ways that is both close into people we know, but also the people that we encounter that we don't know, that we may never see again. Or you may be involved in a national, and have a national presence. Maybe you're an author. Maybe you're a teacher. Maybe you're a teacher at UVA. Is that the right? Because I heard there's some. Like you have students, right? And so you have this sphere of influence. And how are you bringing your teachings and practices and your awakening into those relationships? Mother Teresa said, in this life, we cannot do great things. We can only do small things with great love. So to sense that even the small things matter, right? We may not be a world leader or a community leader, but there's this, I love this comic. It's from a comic called Baby Blues. I don't know whether you have this here, if this is nationally syndicated, but it's the story of a younger brother and an older sister. And so the younger brother is like pointing this way and saying, "It stopped raining, let's go." And she's reading a book, and she looks up and she goes, "Go where?" And he says, "We need to pick up the worms on the sidewalk so people don't step on them or squish them with their bike tires." And she's going, "What? Why?" And he says, "Where have you been? People all over the world are worried about this." And she rolls her eyes, older sister eye roll or older sibling eye roll. They're worried about global warming, not global worming. But the optimist, he's like this, heading out the door. "Well, I'm worried about both." So it's this contrast. If we think we have to do really big things or do nothing at all, I take great inspiration from this character. Well, I'm worried about both. And so you know what it's like if you do this, to just save the life of something small. Everything wants to live. Putting a spider outside instead of stepping on it. I remember being at a retreat that I was teaching last year in Spokane, and we had a really, conditions led to, there were a lot of those little teeny flying, sometimes they're called no-see-ums, or little black flies. And they were real, and they get right here and they bite. I mean, they're very aggressive. I don't know what their shtick is, but it's, they're probably trying to eat, and get blood and all of that. But what I found was, and we were doing walking practice outside, and what I found was I could swish my hair around like that, like the tail of a horse. That sometimes helped. But when they got up here, there was no way to do that. And so the buzzing really made me reactive. It was like just a knee-jerk reaction. So what I started doing was practicing walking with my hands over my ears. And that helped. I didn't have the sensory input of the sound that was making me reactive or feeling like zzz. And so I was walking around, and so then what was funny is looking around, and we all started kind of doing that, putting our hands over our ears. And it doesn't mean that we didn't necessarily kill some of them in the doing of that, but there was the intention to do no harm, the actual intention to do no harm. And each time we do that, it builds a kind of cellular memory of it's possible to care about the little things. The little beings. Just because they're small doesn't mean they're not wanting to live. So as we're learning to do this and practice this here, there's that sense of offering ourselves care, and even there may have been moments of self-forgiveness in practice. Something comes up and you feel the ouch of, oh, I said something or did something. And I can't make it up to that person right now, they're not here, but I can feel into knowing that my intention was to do this, but my impact was that. I know that what I said was hurtful, even though that wasn't my conscious intention. And we know, many of you have sat with Ruth King. In fact, she was here last year, yes, at this retreat. And she's just been here for the book festival. She's been in town, and she was at IMCC on Tuesday. And just this sense of, can we really feel and be open to the impact that we have, even if it wasn't an intention. In fact, to say, oh, I didn't mean to do that, is adding insult to injury. But to be open to say, I know that I made a mistake. I hear you. I hear how you received what I said. I want to know, because my relationship with you is more important than being right. I don't need to defend myself. That's a possibility, even when we're being criticized. It's like, oh, that was the impact. Can we, in that moment, role reverse with that person, try to feel from the inside by listening to them deeply? And what a difference that makes. But there has to be a certain kind of clearing out of the need to be right or the sensitivity to criticism to be able to do that, yeah? But it's a way of having a gesture that has been harmful can be something that builds a bridge rather than creates a higher wall. If we have in that moment the humility to say, tell me how it was for you, and I am sorry. I am sorry. I had a big dose of that last year. And I learned a lot. I felt like I was the rock in the tumbler that gets all the edges off because you keep getting whirled around in there. But what allowed me to stay in the tumbler was taking refuge in the triple gems. A lot about Sangha, a lot about having people to talk to and to say, not, oh, you didn't mean it, it's okay, honey. Those are not the kind of people I need when I'm being confronted with a way that I've hurt someone. I need somebody to help me hold myself accountable in a really deep way, because that's going to be the learning that actually uproots that ignorance, right? That not seeing clearly, that sense of being a separate solid self rather than sensing my interconnectedness and my inner being. And it's not a very pleasant place to live from. So I'd rather be in the tumbler most of the time. I also like to know that I can turn the tumbler off when I need to, right? And I can take solace in friendship and remember that, to see the Buddha nature in myself as well as others. And it really is about how do we take care of ourselves in a way that is sustainable. Right? We talk about wanting to find sustainable energy out there in the world. They ought to be out there doing it, right? But how do we sustain our own energy? How do we sustain our own peace of mind? And many of you may know this particular teacher. She teaches at the East Bay Meditation Center in Oakland. Her name is Musham Akita. And she wrote an article that came out of Buddha Dharma and then was also recently put in Lion's Roar, the one that's online. And she is a nationally known Buddhist teacher, social justice activist, author, and diversity, equity, inclusion consultant. And I just want to read a bit of this. She has worked with groups of people who want to be doing activist work. And she's done this for years. And she says, when I get desperate, which is pretty often, I ask myself how not to be overwhelmed by despair or cynicism. Right? And we don't necessarily need to be activists to feel some despair and cynicism. We just have to watch the news, right? There's that potential. And so she said, for my own sake, for my family, and for my Sangha, I need to vow to not burn out. And I ask others to vow similarly so they'll be around when I need them for support. In fact, I've formulated a great vow for mindful activists. It goes like this. Aware of suffering and injustice, I, and then I would say Dori Langevin, or you would say your name, am working to create a more just, peaceful, and sustainable world. I promise, for the benefit of all, to practice self-care, mindfulness, healing, and joy. I vow not to burn out. And she compares it to the archetype of the Bodhisattva, right? These archetypes in the different traditions where they just keep going and going and going and going, right? It's like, but they're archetypes. They're not human beings. Whether it's Kuan Yin or Avalokiteshvara or Kannon, there's different varieties. Shen, how do you say it? Well, the Dalai Lama. He is human, but he's got that he may be one of those, well, he is a bodhisattva. I was going to say that he may be part archetype and part human. But Musham was saying how, but I'm not an archetype. I'm a human being, and I have a family. And she said she loves a selection from a poem called Bodhisattva Vows by Albert Sajo, who's a Japanese-American author and philosopher and poet, and hung out with a lot of the beat poets in the 50s and 60s. It says, this is just part of the poem, it says, "You're spending all your time and energy getting other people off the sinking ship into lifeboats bound gaily for nirvana. Well, there you are, sinking. And, of course, you had to go and give away your life jacket. So now let's be cheerful as we sink, our spirit ever buoyant as we sink." So this poem is like the contrast between as human beings and what it's like to be able to take a vow not to burn out, not to sink, but to take care of ourselves so that the archetype can still be there, and that can be a model. It can be something to aspire to, but to recognize what our human limitations are. She says, because self-martyrdom is bad role modeling. And she says, the longer we live, the healthier we are, the happier we feel, the more we can gain the experience and wisdom needed to contribute toward a collective reimagining of relationships, education, work, and play. So it's a really strong antidote for any barriers we have to taking care of ourselves, to self-compassion, to self-care, to what is, she also talks about deep, I advocate for more forgiving and spacious schedules of spiritual practice that value being well rested and that move toward honoring the body-mind's need for enough sleep and downtime, like radical rest. Now that's, there's a lot of energies that might interfere with that in terms of staying busy and all that we have to do. But to say that radical rest is a practice, I like to call it recess. In school, at least when I was young, you got to have recess. You got to go out and do whatever you wanted. You didn't have to go out and do a special sport. You didn't all go out together and have to play a game. You got to recess, to sort of step back. So I write that on my calendar. And it isn't stuff I should do. Although it may be something, it's one of those kind of, well, it would be a good idea if I meditated. It'd be a good idea if I took a walk. Sometimes I play words with friends and have a cup of tea. It's because that just completely allows me to relax and think about something that I'm still connected with people, but I'm not sitting at my desk doing work. I go somewhere else. And there's a lot of other things, but what do we do for recess? Which is really do whatever we want for that 10 minutes, 1/2 hour, 2 hours. Could get really radical and have a 2-hour recess. So the encouragement here is that, yes, the reaching in is important. Our practice is so important so that we can be out in the world in a way, again, that aligns with our values, what really matters to us. And to do it in a way that's restorative, right? To do it in a way that's actually taking care of ourselves so we can be present in the world. As Howard Zinn said, the future is an infinite succession of presents. meaning multiple, with an S, presence. Plural present, a succession of presents. And to live now as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, in itself is a marvelous victory. To live now as we think human beings should live, to live the life, to be the change we want to see. To weave Gandhi in for a moment. I have this on my refrigerator in a smaller version. Right there. It's like I keep remembering that because there's times when if I don't remember that I get caught in despair. And in despair I get immobile. And that's not how I want to be. Oh wow. So the last thing I'll say is this is from two lines from Angel Kyoto Williams. Some of you may know her. She's a author of Being Black, Zen and the Art of Living with Fearlessness and Grace, and also more recently Radical Dharma, Talking Race, Love and Liberation, an African-American Zen teacher. It was from a talk on being with Kristen Tippett called The World is Our Field of Practice. I think of it as the world is our meditation hall. And two lines that she started out with. We cannot have a healed society. We cannot have justice if we do not reclaim and repair the human spirit. So for me, that's another way of saying, unless we reach in, and whatever words work for you, repair the human spirit isn't what you feel like you're doing, whatever it is that we're doing in these beautiful practices and how they're transforming us, we need to do that to have the healing manifest out there and to have the justice and the true equality and inclusion and respect that many of us value.